What is the German government doing as a, if you want to contrast it to the European Union?
So we can identify the actors on the different levels. The head of the EU Commission is a German, Ursula von der Leyen, and she's personally responsible for EU censorship because she approved the campaign on COVID-19 in June 2020. And she started the COVID-19 disinformation monitoring program and forced the internet platforms to report and to delete and to manipulate. And the second one is Vera Jourova, the vice president for values and transparency and the former head of the EU Commission for Justice. And she managed the whole thing, the discussions with TikTok, Meta, Google, and other platforms. And the third one is Thierry Breton, a former commissioner for the domestic market. And he wrote to Elon Musk on August 12, 2024, "We will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox." That means he set X under pressure. The next one is Prabhat Agarwal, the head of Digital Services Act enforcement. He has to, he's the manager of all these things. And the fifth one is Renate Nicolai, the Deputy Director General of DG Connect, Directorate General for Communications, Networks, Content and Technology. And she has to translate the Digital Services Act into action, into a control of recommender systems. But we have to keep in mind that the national governments are playing a kickback game. So responsible for the sanctions, for example, is the EU Minister Council of the different nations, of the different states. And that means the EU Commission, and on the EU level, will be done what the national governments have decided before. That's the problem. So it is a kickback game. The national governments decide to set somebody on the sanctions list, and they kick to Brussels, and then Brussels has to do. And then the ball will be kicked back to the national level and also to the German level. The German Bundestag transformed the EU sanctions against persons on January 15 into national law and reinforced the sanctions. Any helper of a sanctioned person can be punished and can go to prison for 10 years. And this is completely crazy. And there is no legal ground for that. No legal ground. It is just illegal and is completely voluntarily. So we are not in a government defined by law. It is a government, just a despotism, nothing else. We lost ground of democracy in the European Union.
Is there any source of optimism coming anywhere, though? Do you see any institutions or media, civil society, academia, anyone who is pushing back against this, at least marginally successful? Or where does the hope come in here? Or should we rely on, as we got from the US National Security Strategy of December 2025, put it in the hands of the United States to promote alternative governments in Europe, because that doesn't seem like a very ideal outcome either.
Yes, on the first level, I have to say Europe needs help from outside. And this is exactly what the US Congress did. They published a report because US citizens are affected by that. US citizens are affected by traveling through the EU, and so the rules of the EU are working worldwide. So US citizens are affected by that. And the second level is we both, Glenn, you and me, we can do just our job and make that public, what they are doing to create a consciousness about that. But in the end, people has to fight for their rights, and they don't do that at the moment. We are looking back into a history of democracy of, let me say, 300 years. And all over this time, people had to fight for their rights. And there was a lot of blood flooding out. And now we are in a time we have to go back to these people and we have to fight for our rights. People have to go into the streets and to fight for their democratic rights against anti-democratic elites.
Why do you think this isn't happening yet, though? Because do people not realize what is happening? Because of course the media is not going to cover much of this. But of course, but also they're not really exposed to any of these, alternative perspectives. I find it shocking because every dissent is simply pushed back as a source of treason. But key important leading officials who no one could accuse of having sympathies with Russia, who still argues that this was provoked, they will simply never appear in the media because you have this very strict narrative control there that is irrespective of what is reality. The information is often assessed by to what extent they support the NATO narrative or the Russian narrative, and this is the simple binary. And anything that doesn't support the NATO narrative is seen as essentially being propaganda. So how do you overcome this?
I think EU citizens have to learn that the mainstream media are part of the propaganda system, and they have to check out for news sources. They have different possibilities. They can use the new media, like your channel or my channel, or in Germany Nachdenkseiten, or in the United States Consortium News, or in Canada the Postil magazine, or something else. And then they can evaluate the situation in a better way. They can trust their eyes and their ears. They have to keep in personal touch to each other and to exchange their experiences. That helps. We are not alone. We are not alone. But I think the majority of German citizens is living actually like zombies in a kind of second reality. And this feeling comes from the corona restrictions. I think most people in Germany are broken. They are frustrated, they are hopeless. And the background are the corona restrictions, which made clear to everybody the arm of the state is very long, and to have, only minor chances to stand up to these measures. And many people believed in the corona restrictions, but it is very clear it was politically initiated and not initiated by medicine. So it is, most people are part of this system of lies, and it's very hard to understand that I lost my life partly in believing in, let me say, shit. And it's difficult to make that clear for myself because I'm losing my face looking into the mirror. That's the problem. And I think, The only hope is people have to vote for other parties, not for the established party cartel anymore, because this is a warmongering party cartel, and this is a party cartel who is destroying democracy. This is very clear. They have to vote for other parties, and they have to fight for their rights. This is the only way I see.
I'm wondering to what extent, though, this it actually matters who you vote for, because in the UK now they see this radical alternative possibly coming into power, which would be Nigel Farage, and they think, "Oh, this is radically different." But then when you turn on the telly and they time to talk about something Epstein files, which delegitimizes a lot of the British officials and elites appeared in these documents, he says, well, this might be just Russian propaganda, that they are behind the Epstein files, that he was an agent of the Russians. I mean, it's just the worst kind of Russiagating there is. After doing this whole Russiagate of, Trump being a spy agent of the Kremlin, then you had the Biden laptop being a Russian conspiracy. Now they're actually trying to Russiagate the Epstein files, and it's quite clever in one way because it doesn't make any sense. You don't need any evidence behind it, because anyone who contests it saying, well, how does that make sense? There's no evidence. Then they are smeared as a Russian asset. So people just go along, it seems. It's quite frustrating, but do you see any alternatives? I mean, across Europe at least, who would take a radically different stance in the defense of freedom of speech?
Actually not. So the Epstein files show that Epstein was not an agent, a spy of Russia. He was linked to the Mossad and to Israel. That's the one level. That's the first level. And the second level is, it is an introspection of our elites. They do everything. Well, it's completely moral hazard. They are doing everything. So, and this is frustrating the citizens much more, because they learn from the Epstein case that they can do nothing against it. But this is the wrong way of learning from the Epstein files. So we have to learn from the Epstein files that our elites are so decadent that we need new elites. We have to exchange our elites. And this is the only way. So the problem in Germany and possibly in the UK and France is, so this all is in favor of right populistic parties like the AfD. And what we see right now in Germany is a transformation of the AfD into not a from a peace-loving party to a transatlantic party. So in the end, if the AfD will come into power after the next Bundestag elections in Germany, we will have a new instrument of Washington to influence the German government. So it's the same process that we saw in Italy with Ms. Maloney. And Washington tries to repeat this process. And this is part of the new American security strategy. They will bring these parties like AfD and the Right Populists Party into power as an instrument of American influence.
Well, it doesn't give much room for optimism, I guess. But given that what is, I guess, well, from my perspective, a key problem is that we've had this external fear for so long. This essentially the search for internal dissidents or enemies within. This is something that Carl Schmitt was writing about. That is also when one is human beings are faced with an external threat, there's more instinct for group loyalty and solidarity, in which one essentially seeks to snuff out any dissent, anyone deviating from the group and the authorities' official narratives. It just seems that we went through all this decade of searching for internal enemies. That is, first we had the Russia Gate, where everyone, anyone who voted for Brexit or voted for Trump, and anyone could be a Russian agent essentially. And then, of course, this was replaced by COVID, which we also look for in internal enemies to some extent. And then, of course, the Ukraine war. And we're also, the public has to be policed, that they have the right opinion. It just seems that the Europeans need a few years of break to essentially normalize and be allowed again to actually dissent from the governments, because this is my main concern. It's very much been normalized, but given that war is now seen as the justification for restriction, just as a last question, do you think any of this can be restored to normalcy after the Ukraine war is over?
Well, I'm not very optimistic, because we are facing a new century of wars and a century of the destruction of democracies. And this is exactly a result of your analysis, Glenn, as well. We see the decline of the West, of the unipolar world, and the rise of the multipolar world. And in this process, the vessels will see more and more restrictions. The United States will keep the line shorter for the vessels, and they are cutting claims with Russia and China. And that means, in the domestic sphere, a loss of democracy. And, well, the only hope in a global perspective is the rise of the multipolar world and new governments in Asia, in China and Africa. So the European governments made so many mistakes, from my point of view, that the game is over. We will become the backyard of the United States and the backyard of Russia as well. And my personal dystopia is the Hollywood movie Mad Max. Criminal bandits will cruise around Europe and terrorize the population. And these terrorists are the governments, which are running the state against their own people. They are exploiting their own people in favor of themselves and in favor of the United States. Because this war in Ukraine means the transfer of taxpayers' money of the EU as a whole to the United States military industrial complex. So the citizens of Europe will get poorer and poorer. And that's the situation. An increase of exploitation, an increase of the danger of a nuclear war, and, well, a decline of social welfare. This is the new 21st century.